Greetings, citizens. Hey you beautiful creepy human being you. Welcome to my channel and welcome to today's true crime video. I'm so happy we can meet like this. I'm so happy that somehow in all of this that we're forced to deal with on the today, you and I were able to find each other on this crazy little planet that we call home. My name is Brittany or Bratterstein, whichever you prefer, and today we're going to be discussing Mandy Stavik, a teenage girl who was murdered while visiting home for Thanksgiving break in 1989, and despite authorities' best efforts, her case went unsolved for years and has just recently been solved. But before we get started, if you have not yet had the pleasure, please make sure to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out a new video every single week and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you, specifically you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. One of us, one of us, one of us. Now, before I get into the details of today's case, I first need to say a big thank you to Dossier for partnering with me on today's video. It's partners like Dossier that make it possible for me to put out videos as consistently as I do. Now, if you are not familiar with Dossier, don't you worry, you're about to get familiar with Dossier. Dossier is a fragrance company that creates luxury scents, but at a fraction of the luxury price point, where most luxury perfume brands literally cost $50 to hundreds of dollars, which first off, how dare they? Dossier's perfumes range anywhere from $29 to $49, and they offer bulk deals with up to 25% off and also free shipping when you buy 3 or more bottles, which is a deal that sounds too good to be true, but I promise you it's not. I'm telling you the truth. This is real life. So today I have 2 scents to share with you, and one is a fan favorite and one is a new one that I am so excited about because once I smelled it I was like, ma'am, are you sure? Are you sure that this is real life? Because wow. So first I have Citrus Green Apple, which is inspired by Dolce & Gabbana's Light Blue, which if you've been here before, you know I've gotten this one and I've gotten this one and I've gotten this one and I can't stop, won't stop, baby, because it just smells so good and everyone in my whole entire family loves this one. And every time I get a bottle, they're like, can I have it? And I'm like, yeah, if you use my coupon code, that would be very helpful. Thanks. Now the other one I have that I've never had before, this is Dossier's scent Spicy Orchid, and it's inspired by Tom Ford's Black Orchid, I believe is the name. And let me tell you, this perfume smells like a secret. Does that make sense to you? Like, the person that wears this is a hottie in a trench coat. Like, okay, a Scorpio definitely wears this perfume. Like, the idea of a Scorpio, the stereotype of a Scorpio, this is the scent that they wear. And you know what? I am a Scorpio. Not to say that I'm like a hottie in a trench coat, but you know what I mean. Now, if the amazing scent isn't enough of a selling point for you when it comes to perfume, which really I believe that's probably the majority of people's like top priority is like, does it smell good? Great, let's put it on my body and let's put it in my cart. But for me, a huge selling point and something that I always talk about because it's very important to me is Dossier is a cruelty-free fragrance company, and most luxury brands just simply are not. So if you love animals as much as I do, this could be a great fit for you. And plus, you know, there's the whole, they're a fraction of the price anyway. So like it's a win-win. There's no losing here. It's win, win, win. That's the option. Now, I have great news for you. Dossier is offering members of the Brat Pack 10% off of their entire order if you use the code Bratterstein at checkout, and this coupon code is good for a limited time, so you want to jump on it while it is hot. And I don't think you're going to find a better deal out there with my coupon code. They're already so affordable. Hey, my coupon code, 10% off. You combine, get multiple bottles, get the free shipping. I'm just saying, I'm not telling you what to do because I'm not your mom, but like, I know a good deal when I see one, and this is a great deal. So if all of that sounds as good to you as it does to me, don't forget to click the link in my description box to let Dossier know that I sent you, because that's always like a super helpful thing for this channel. And use the code Bratterstein at checkout to get 10% off of your new favorite bottle of perfume or bottles of perfume today. Now, I just want to say a big thank you to Dossier for partnering with me on today's video, and a big thank you to you guys for always being so supportive of all of my sponsors. You rock. Don't ever change. All right, now that I'm done begging you to join my cult, we can go ahead and get into this video. Now, today's video is going to be on Mandy Stavik's murder, obviously, but this video is part 2. I covered the first half last week. If you haven't seen that, I would highly suggest watching it before this one, because we go through so much information. We go through discussing who Mandy was. We go through talking about her family and the fact that they have already been through so much tragedy prior to Mandy being killed, because Mandy's older brother was murdered years before Mandy was murdered. So now her family, her mother, has gone through the loss of 2 children. It's insane. We went through the investigation, we went through the suspects, we went through the connection or lack thereof between Mandy's case and the Green River killer. if you are familiar, I'm sure you are. And we talk about how this guy, the guy who killed Mandy, came onto police's radar. And we talk about the fact that even though he was local, he lived like down the street from Mandy in a super, super small town, he was never even on police's radar until two local women just hanging out at a water park, put their heads together and were like, hey, maybe this guy should be looked at. And this was years after the murder. So today I'm going to tell you the entire story. I read all the things so that you do not have to. And at the end of this video, I'm going to ask you a question of the day. I'm going to give it to you now so you can have it kicking around in your brain while we go through all the details of this case. But obviously I want you to answer it once you have some information, some context, as they say. And the question of the day is this. How do you feel about the way Mandy's killer's DNA was retrieved? Obviously that doesn't make sense right now because I haven't given you the information, but once I do, it's going to make sense. And I really want to know how you feel about that. So let me know all your thoughts in the comments below after we go through all the details of this case. Now, with all of that said, come gather around and let me tell you the rest of the story of the murder of Mandy Stavik. Now, I want to start this video off with a brief synopsis of what we covered last week. It's going to be pretty brief because I already covered it in detail, just in case you forgot something, or just in case you're one of those people who doesn't want the details, which is weird that you'd be here, and you just want a quick synopsis before we get into the conclusion. I guess this is for you. On the Friday after Thanksgiving, on November 24th, 1989, 18-year-old Mandy Stavik, who was home visiting for the holiday from college, left her mother's home, which was on Strand Road in a small town in Washington, to go on a run with her dog, Kyra. Mandy and Kyra both left, but only Kyra came back. This resulted in a huge search for Mandy, with the public and the police believing that she had been abducted, and they allocated every single available resource to the search for Mandy, but nothing came up. It's very sad. And then on the third day of searching, Mandy was found. She was found nude, floating in the Nooksack River. Her autopsy determined that she had blunt force trauma to the top of her head, but her cause of death was actually drowning. And the autopsy also concluded that she had been sexually assaulted before she was killed. Authorities really did everything they could to figure out what had happened to Mandy. They went down a bunch of different paths, followed every single lead, checked a bunch of suspects, checked a multitude of people for DNA, because they did have a DNA profile that they had retrieved from Mandy. They worked with Crime Stoppers, they worked with the Green River Killer Task Force, and still every lead they followed led to a dead end. That was until 2013, when two women who had been teenage girls or like young adults at the time that Mandy went missing and were now adults were just gossiping at a water park when Mandy came up. The subject of Mandy and her disappearance came up, and they both realized that they had always had a sneaking suspicion of who might have been responsible, but neither of them before that time had ever said it out loud. But once they did, they realized they had the same person in mind, and this was a man named Timothy Forrest Bass, and this man was now police's #1 suspect. Wow. That really was short and sweet and to the point. So I guess you don't even need to watch the other video. You do. You should. But let's now from there move on. So now Tim is on police's radar for the first time. And remember, it's been decades by this point. So he has moved on with his life in a big way. He is married. He has 3 kids. He's moved to a nearby community of Everson. He has a job. He works for a bakery. He goes and delivers those baked goods. He drives the truck, delivers them baked goods, and he's living a very quiet and unassuming life. He doesn't have any record, and he seems to just be kind of keeping to himself and doing his own thing. When police looked into who Tim was at the time Mandy was murdered, they found that it doesn't seem like Tim and Mandy even knew each other. It's possible they crossed paths, but they definitely weren't friends. They had gone to the same high school, but they had gone during different years. And apparently Mandy did know Tim's brother. That's why I'm saying it's possible that they crossed paths, because Mandy and Tim's brother were closer in age. They had the same mutual friends, so they were, acquainted. But Mandy and Tim weren't friends, and Tim wasn't part of the same group of friends that his brother was part of. He was just, Tim was Mandy's friend's brother, right? Did I say that right? Tim is the bad guy. Okay, Tim's brother Tom was friends with Mandy. They were in the same friend group, but Tim wasn't in that friend group. Tim was just Tom's weird, loner, awkward brother. That's what I was trying to say, and I hope that I got it out, because it is very early and I haven't slept very much. But moving on. Now, besides the connection between Mandy and Tim's brother, the only other connection they were able to find between Mandy and Tim at all is that Tim often attended basketball games where Mandy was playing. Because remember, she played a zillion sports. If you watched the first video, her extracurricular activity list was long as hell. She did a lot. So she would play basketball. Tim would show up at these basketball games. And in hindsight, to people who were like there, it seemed like he watched her a bit too much, like watched her specifically. And the only other connection was that Mandy would jog by his house all the time before she went off to college, because this was a run that she did all the time. So he had definitely seen her, knew her routine, knew what she was doing, etc, etc. Now, let's go back to Tim around the time that Mandy was killed. I mean, we're kind of already there because we're talking about the basketball game and the running and stuff, but now we're like solidly there. We're talking about past Tim. Tim married young. He got married at the age of 22 to a girl named Gina. And he actually married this girl just 6 weeks after Mandy was killed. Apparently, Gina and Tim met while she was working at her grandfather's, I believe it was like a general store. And Tim came in to get a hunting license, because apparently that's where you get hunting licenses, is a general store. So he comes in to get his license. He starts talking to her and he asks her out, and she's like, oh, it felt really nice to, be recognized and be, seen as an option for somebody. So she accepted, but she said the relationship moved super duper fast. Like, the two met and they had plans to get married super quick after dating, but they were planning to wait till after Gina graduated high school before they got married. But then after Mandy was killed, apparently he went to her, he rushed to her and he's like, hey, how about we move this up? How about we do it now? And she thought it was weird, but she wasn't really connecting it with the Mandy situation at the time. So she's like, sure. They got married. Okay. And then ended up moving out of the area almost immediately after. Like, Mandy was killed on the 24th of November. And by January of the following year, they had already left the area. Now, though the two got together, young, the relationship moved fast, they got married, they moved away, it doesn't really seem like they married for love. At least not on Gina's part. I don't know about him. Probably not, because he's a dick. But for her, she said that she mostly married him because she just kind of wanted to get away from her family. She wanted to move away from the town that she lived in. She wanted to be out on her own. So she's like, marrying this guy would be the way to do that. It's the 80s. 90, let's do it. But it seems that this was a bad call because he was not a good husband. Once they got married, he was super, super controlling, emotionally abusive. He would dictate who she could and could not talk to, what she could and could not do, where she could and could not go. He would even choose the colors she was allowed to wear. She said through the marriage, she felt like his servant. He would make her do everything for him, and she'd have to do it without saying anything. He wouldn't let her talk. He would tell her to shut up. He would call her a bitch. He would call her a whore. She said that it didn't feel like a marriage. It felt like a prison, but she stuck it out because they had 3 kids together, for one, and 2, she was scared. She said that she was scared of him throughout the time that they were married, that he wasn't often physically abusive, that when they would get into fights, he would come at her with a balled fist, but he didn't often hit her, but he had slammed her into the wall on a couple of occasions. She had tried to leave him once during their marriage. She left him for 2 months, and she actually did get a restraining order. And during this time, she said that she was scared. She was scared for her. She was scared for her children. She said that he was physically and mentally abusive to both her and their kids. And another thing that she said, which was it seems random, but in the context of what we're talking about, it's not random. She said that he was kind of a true crime aficionado, which same. He watched a lot of true crime shows, and he would often watch cold case TV shows where people would get caught after so many years. And he would say that these people were so stupid, the killers were so dumb, and that if he was the one who was killing somebody, he would never get caught. Which I often say that killers are dumb, but I'm certain that if I killed somebody, I'd get caught, and I also wouldn't, and I wouldn't say that. Now, during this time of their separation, where she got the restraining order and all that, she actually did try to file for divorce. She was like, I'm gonna get out of this. But he threatened her, not with violence. He told her that if she tried to get a divorce, he would do everything in his power to get the kids taken away from her. He's like, I will lie to the judge. I will do whatever it takes to make sure you never see our kids again. And she said because of this, because of her fear of losing her kids, because she believed that he would be a vindictive asshole like that, she did come back. And I feel like some people might be like, oh, she's the ex-wife, she's angry, so after the fact she's saying things like this, because I see comments like that. Sometimes people are weird. But a lot of what she said, or some of what she said rather, was corroborated by Tim's own brother, Tom. He said that he would see how Tim would speak to Gina, and he didn't fucking like it. Now, speaking of Tim's brother, police go and speak to him. His name is Tom, by the way. I think I mentioned that. Tim and Tom. And they go to speak to him. And luckily, he is willing to talk to police because they want to try to find out, as much information they can about Tim, who he was growing up, who he was now, all that jazz. And Tom's like, sure, yes, I will talk to you. I guess the relationship between Tim and Tom had been good at some point. Like when they were younger, they were close, like, you know, little brothers and older brothers often are. I don't know, I'm not a brother, I do not have a brother, but I hear that they can be close. They spent a lot of time together when they were younger. They would, you know, play outside. They were super competitive with each other in things like sports. They would play games. He said that his brother seemed like relatively normal for a lot of his younger years. He was definitely like a loner, but as he got older, you know, towards high school and things like that, he definitely had a sort of shift in the way that he was. He said that as a teenager, social interactions just didn't really come easy to Tim, and he would just do some weird shit. Like, okay, he said that in high school, Tim had this girlfriend, and that she had broken up with him, and that Tim and this girlfriend were on the phone, and he was telling her, like, I'm gonna kill myself, which is dramatic and a bit of a red flag, right? But it does happen. But what doesn't happen, and what happened here, is that all of a sudden, Tom, who's in the house, hears a gunshot ring out and realizes that Tim is like telling this girl, I'm gonna kill myself, I'm gonna kill myself, and then fires a gun off like into the ceiling of the house so that she will think that he's done it. That is unhinged behavior. So that was one of the weird things that Tim did when he was younger, and apparently as he got older, he just got weirder and weirder. His brother said that he could see that his brother did not respect women. He could even see that his brother was disgusted by women. He said he got the impression that Tim felt that he was superior to women as a man, and that meant that if a woman denied him, somebody who was below him denied him, it would send him into a complete tailspin. And this is the guy we're talking about here. Now, back to the investigation. So once police learn that Timothy Forrest Bass is a creep supreme, they're like, okay, we need to look into this guy. So what do they do first? Obviously, step one, go and talk to Tim. So they do. They're like, let's go question him. And when they get there, they decide to kind of take a friendly approach in the beginning. They don't want to hardball him right from like the start. So they go and they're like, hey, you know, we're just interviewing people from the past, and we're talking to people about, you know, the murder of Mandy Stavik. And he kind of like looks up at the ceilings like, Mandy, pretending like he doesn't know who she is. Oh, isn't that girl they found in the river? Now this stood out to police because he's trying to seem casual, like he doesn't remember, but this is a weird way to go about it. This is a strange thing because everyone knew about Mandy's murder. Everyone remembered Mandy, right? Like this wasn't something that you're just going to casually forget. Even his wife, Gina, remembered Mandy. She's like, I didn't know her, but I would see her running around, and I definitely remember that she was brutally murdered in our small town because that didn't happen. But then Tim's over here like, I don't know who that is. So police hear this and they're like, I don't know about you, guy. And they're like, hey, would you be so kind as to give us a DNA sample? Because they definitely at this point are feeling like he did it. They already kind of felt like he did it, and now he's pretending he doesn't know Mandy, and they're like, that's weird as hell. So they're like, can we have some of your saliva, please? And he was like, actually, that's going to be a no from me, dog, because here's the thing. I don't want you to have my DNA, and also I watch all those crime shows, and I know how easy it is for somebody to get, like, arrested once they give their DNA, etc., etc. And I'm like, yeah, especially when you're the one who did it. So police leave, and Gina is kind of like, why wouldn't you just give them your DNA? I can only imagine how freaked out she was by this. She's like, why wouldn't you just give them your DNA? Like, let them have it and test it and just be done with this. Like, we could be done. That's it. They'll never show up again. And he was like, no, because here's the thing. They could frame me. People get framed all the time, dude. Like, that's what they be doing with people's DNA. Which, I mean, but not in this case. And she, at this point, was kind of like, oh, fuck, who am I living with? Now, police want his DNA, right? They need his DNA, quite frankly. But he's like, no, I'm not going to be giving that to you. So they're like, shit, we got to get creative here. So they're like, what if we were to go to his work and try to get the DNA there? Because presumably he's just spraying DNA all over the place because we're just leaving DNA at every turn. I don't know how anyone thinks they're getting away with murders anymore because DNA do be everywhere. So they contact his work and they are like, hey, we would like some DNA, please. And they're kind of vague about it. They don't say really what they want, what it's for. I don't even think they said who's specifically they wanted. There was just talk of like swabbing a work truck. And the girl, I believe this was Kim, she was like, listen, this is above my pay grade. So I'm going to have to say like, no, you're going to need a search warrant, which is, you know, they're right. And they were like, shit, we don't have that. So we're at back to square one at a dead end again. Dead end, dead end, dead end. That's what this whole case is about. but they would get a break. They decide that they're going to go back to the bakery because what they want is to get Tim's work truck route, right? So that they could follow him and see if he discarded anything anywhere that could contain his DNA, right? They're doing like the Golden State Killer thing. They're like, okay, let's see, maybe he has a soda pop. Maybe he touches some stuff with his hands that are all sweaty and gross, whatever. So they go in and they're like, hey, we wanted to see if we could get the driving route of one of your drivers. And this is when Kim, the manager, I believe, is like, can you just come to my office real quick? And they're like, sure. So she goes back there with them and they're like, so what's up? And she's like, question. Yes, what? That's what they said. That's not what they said. Anyway, she's like, I have a question for you. And they're like, okay, what? And she's like, are you investigating Mandy Stavik's murder? And they were like, yeah. And she was like, are you looking into Tim Bass? And at that moment, because at this time, nobody knows they're looking into him. So they hear this. She's unprompted. She's bringing up Tim. And I'm sure internally they're just like something's up if she's saying his name and we're looking into him. There's got to be a reason she would think that. So they tell her like, yes, okay, yes, we are looking into him. And she decides at this point, oh, this is within my pay grade. And she decides to help. She gives them the route. She doesn't know exactly why they're following him, like for the DNA specifically or whatever, but she knows that they want it. She knows that they're looking into him for that. And she's like, sure, yes, here's his route. Now, why was she all of a sudden like willing to help when before? She's like, that is above my pay grade. Well, it turns out after the police had come into the bakery asking for the DNA and getting rejected, Kim had been out with some like work acquaintances at a bar, I believe. Doesn't matter where they were. I think it was a bar though. They were hanging out and they were just like shooting the shit, talking shit about their other coworkers, you know. If you know, you know. I mean, I don't have any coworkers anymore, but back when we had coworkers, back when I worked at the law firm, everybody was talking shit about everybody. So they're out, they're kind of talking shit, and the subject of Tim comes up and they talk about how he's such a weirdo, how he's such a creep, and then somebody mentions like, oh, and did you know that like he lived on the street that Mandy Stavik lived on when she was killed, da 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 da. And it's at this moment that a light bulb went off in Kim's head and she was like, oh shit, I wonder if when police came they were coming because they wanted Tim's DNA in connection with Mandy's murder, da da da. So her head starts spinning and that's when she realizes like, oh, I bet that's what they were looking into. So when they come back, wanting like the work truck route, she was like, I need to help because this is clearly what they're investigating. So a surveillance team was put on Tim and they followed him all night while he drove his bakery route. They were watching him like a hawk, like, okay, let's see. What's he doing? What's he doing? Is he going to throw anything away? Any DNA? A la Golden State Killer. But alas, no, he never did. He wore gloves the whole time he was, it's like he knew, but he didn't know. He probably was just a glove wearer, but it just seemed, I'm sure they were like, fuck, man, because he wore gloves when he was stocking the shelves. He didn't smoke. He didn't drink anything. He didn't throw anything away. So they were stumped. They couldn't do anything. It's at this point that police actually go back to Kim and they let her know like, hey, the tailing was unsuccessful. And this is when she asks them just straight up like, listen, do you want DNA? And they were like, yeah, actually, that's exactly what we want. And she was like, I got you. And she told him, like, I knew that you would want DNA because I watch those CSI shows. This is what I do, so I know what you want. And they were like, we can't, like, legally ask you to retrieve his DNA because that would be, you know, it's just not, what is it? Privacy. I don't know. There's, like, a law. They can't ask her to get the DNA. And she's like, well, you're not asking me. I'm telling you that I would be happy to do it, so don't you worry. I'm going to get it. And I'm just going to give it to you. And I just picture this whole conversation with like the police being like, Kim, would you like to form an alliance? And her being like, absolutely, I do. Just like in The Office with Jim and Dwight, remember? If you don't know, you don't know. But either way, she was invested and it was rocking and it was rolling. I mean, she was local, right? She was 19 when Mandy was murdered, and like everybody else, she had been affected by her murder. It had been the first time in her life that she wasn't feeling safe in her home. She said it changed everyone's perspective in their little corner of the world. And she said that she was a mom now. And if anything happened to her kid, like she'd want to know what happened. And she couldn't imagine how Mandy's mom was feeling all of these years later, having no idea what happened to her daughter. So she was like, listen, you're not asking me to help, but I am going to do what I can to help. Now, Kim said that she knew that Tim was weird. Like, she didn't think he was a murderer, but she knew he was weird. He was the type of guy who, when you worked with him, you didn't know which version of Tim you were going to get that day. He was the type of guy who would get irrationally angry over small things. Like his reaction to situations were unjustified, unwarranted, right? They were just like a bit too much for the situation. That makes sense, yes. She said she also knew that he didn't respect women because even though she was his boss, he didn't call her by her name. He called her woman, which is so disrespectful and frustrating. And she said that she was just kind of like, and would shrug it off. But in hindsight, it's like, oh, call me woman because he doesn't respect me even a little bit. She said that ever since the police had shown up, she couldn't get it out of her mind that somebody she knew might have been the person responsible for what happened to Mandy. And she said that, like, in her gut, she felt like it was him, but in her heart, she felt like it wasn't. She had a hard time grappling with the fact that somebody that she knew, somebody that everyone knew could have done this, and that they had been betrayed by somebody that close to them all of these years. Like, that would be very hard to, like, be like, wow, you really just don't know anybody. How do you trust anybody? So from that day on, she tried to get his DNA. She would follow him all over the place to see if he would, like, set something down or throw something out that might have his saliva on it. She was, like, being a little detective. She would clean out the trash can so that if he did throw something in the trash, his trash would be the only trash there. So she could be like, aha, I got it. But day after day, he spurred her advances. He thwarted her plans. But then, 3 months after having that conversation with police, it happened. It took her by surprise. No, but it did happen. He threw away a plastic water cup that he had, like, filled up from the water cooler, and he threw away a Coke can. And as soon as she saw them in there, she was like, oh shit, it's go time. The time is nice. She said her heart was, like, beating out of her chest, but, like, there were people around, so she had to be all stealth about it, but she was able to, like, quickly grab the cup and the Coke can. She threw them in her desk drawer. She sealed them up, signed, sealed, delivered them to police. Now, after getting those samples, it took another 3 months for them to get the results back from the lab. But when they did, the lab tech, I believe her name was Katie, she called police. And I believe it was Ken Bowie, I think his last name was, who took the call. And she just says, listen, we have a match. And the officer was like, holy shit. He said it didn't feel like a real time. It felt surreal. It felt like a dream. He's like, this is a dream I could wake up from at any time, because after all these years, they finally had a match to the DNA of the person who killed Mandy. And it just, like, blew their mind because it was definitely him. Like, it was a 1 in 11 quadrillion match. And I was like, quadrillion? What? Like, that's 15 zeros. And the officer, when he heard this news, he just started to cry. So police head back to talk to Tim, and they actually catch him as he's leaving work. And they're like, hey, we have a question for you. And he's like, what? What now? And they're like, so you never knew Mandy? No. You never met her? No. You didn't have a relationship with her? You didn't kiss her? No. And police are like, this is great. This is perfect, because now he can't try to explain the DNA later, right? By saying, like, oh, I knew her. Oh, we had a consensual relationship. No, you're saying right now you never knew her. So they're like, okay, you didn't know her? Didn't have a relationship with her? Then why was your DNA inside her body, bro? And this is when he responds with something that's weird, not like, I would never, not, oh my God, like, I didn't do it. He said, how'd you get my DNA? What are you talking about? But his goose was effectively cooked. And now on December 12th, 2017, 28 years after Mandy's murder, he was arrested and he was charged with kidnapping, sexual assault, and murder. And that same day, police went over to inform Mandy's mother that the murderer of her daughter had finally been caught after all of these years. And she was in shock. She did not believe that she would ever, I'm getting all goose skinned. She did not believe that she would ever hear those words. She never believed that she would ever find out what happened to Mandy. And now she was learning this on her 81st birthday. See? No. Detectives also called Kim, the manager, that helped them get the DNA. And they told her, like, listen, it was a match. We got him. It was a match. And she was very emotional. She asked her, one of her first questions was like, does the family know? And they were like, yeah. And she said, like, good, that's why she did it, that she did it for Mandy's mother, because she never forgot Mandy. Now, if you're curious, Mandy's mom, Mary, and Kim did meet. They hugged, and Kim told her, like, I did this for you. She said, like, she had been called a hero, but she doesn't feel like it was her. She felt like it was a collaborative effort. She did say that she was, like, proud of what she did, but that's just who she is. She does the right thing. She said that she feels like it was Mandy's soul that guided her towards getting justice, and she said she's just happy that now Mandy can be set free with them getting a guilty verdict. She said that, like, even though she didn't know Mandy, she kind of felt like she did. And she said that all of Mandy's family and friends that she met have just been, like, completely wonderful to her. And that kind of made her feel even sadder that Mandy's never going to come back. And that this guy got to live 30 years, basically, as a free man. Because he was 50 by the time he was arrested. Which, I mean, he still has, you know, presumably several years left to rot in prison. But he got so many years as a free guy. Got to get married, got to have his kids. It's just not fair. But, you know, Kim said that she did what she could. And that, you know, it wasn't an easy decision for her, though. She said she definitely had her reservations and that she had fears in helping. She was afraid of helping the cops, basically. She said that after Tim's arrest, she was worried about how people might react when they found out she was the one that helped turn him in. She wasn't sure if she would, like, lose her job, and she was worried about her safety, so she took steps to protect herself. Apparently, the bakery even hired an armed guard at the store for 3 weeks after Tim's arrest, just in case. And, you know, I'm not really sure who she thought would be rocking and rolling in there, but she did what she had to do to keep herself safe. So Tim was arrested, as I said, and he was denying it and denying it. He was not, you know, admitting to anything. He said, "You're trying to get me to admit to something that I did not do here." He tried to act like he had no idea why they would have him there, and he was trying to figure out if they really had his DNA. Because, again, he watched crime shows, so he knows that police can legally lie to you. They can say they have something they don't. So he's trying to figure out if they're just lying to him or if they really have his DNA. But once they realize that they do in fact have his DNA, he changes up the story a little bit. He tried to Shyamalan twist the officers by saying, "Okay, listen, I lied when I said I didn't know Mandy. I did know her. I knew her well. We were even intimate with each other, and that's why my DNA is there. And I just lied and told you that I didn't know her and that I hadn't slept with her because I don't trust police and I don't trust the government and I didn't want to be honest with you." He said that he had met Mandy one day while she was out on a jog and that he had met her with his father. Put a pin in that and remember that for later because it's gonna, you know what, actually, remember it now. Basically, by the time he was arrested, his father was dead. So the only person who had ever, you know, seen that he knew Mandy, had any record, any person who ever once had seen them, that's a good sentence, the only person who could be like, yes, he knew Mandy, was now dead. But we will come back to his dad a little bit later because this Tim guy's a dick. This Tim guy is a dick. He said that the two had met the spring before she left for school, and he said that when they first met, their relationship really was just as friends, and most of the time it was just friends. They confided in each other. They talked about, you know, their hopes and their dreams, and just, they had that sort of friendship relationship. He said that it wasn't even that sexual once it did move past the friendship stage. They mostly would, like, kiss and cuddle, but occasionally it would go farther. So he tells police this, he tells his defense attorney this, and he tells his wife this, because remember, he was with her at this time, so he tells her that he cheated on her, and she promptly divorces him, which good for her. But she didn't divorce him that quick, so not super good for her. So when Tim was being interviewed, Gina came in, his wife, and she was interviewed too, and she actually gave Tim an alibi. She said that the day Mandy went missing, she was on her way to Tim's house because she always went to see him after school. And she said on the way, she actually saw Mandy. She saw Mandy run right past her. So she then said that her and Tim were together the whole rest of the afternoon. So he couldn't have done anything to hurt Mandy because she had seen Mandy alive and well, and then he was with her the whole time after. Now, she did come back later to police and tell them that the alibi she gave him was a lie. She said that he told her that she needed to lie for him or he was going to go to prison. And so she did it. She felt like she had to do anything she said. And she said that she felt like if she didn't lie for him, she could be next, which I don't know. I don't know how I feel about this whole situation because, you know, she did say she was abused. It's sticky. It's one of those sticky things, but the facts are that she lied for him and then she came back and she told the truth. And she said that at that point, she was a weak person. She was a weak person when she was with him, but since then she has gotten stronger and she wishes she had just gone with her gut from the beginning. So, I don't know. You let me know what you think about that whole situation. I'm kind of like, I go back and forth because I'm like, it's fucked up to lie and give somebody an alibi for murder, but also abused women, abused people have been broken down over so much time that I don't know how I feel. I wasn't there, I wasn't in her head, so moving on. Back to Tim. Tim tells police the Shyamalan twist that he had been sleeping with Mandy. But here's the thing. He knew nothing about Mandy. He said that they were friends who confided in each other, who talked to each other, like that was the basis of their relationship, but yet he knew nothing about her. He didn't know what she was taking in school. He didn't know what her hopes were, what her dreams were, what she wanted to do with her life after school. Didn't know anything about that. He said he didn't even know that she was home for the break, like the school break, because they never called each other or wrote any letters, because there's no, trail that they knew each other. He said that she just showed up at his house that day, one of these days, during that break, for a booty call. That was it. It sounds like bullshit, right? And her family agreed. When they heard that he was saying this, they were appalled. And her sister said that the idea of them being together was actually laughable to her. And she said specifically of this quote, "There's no way my sister would have had a physical relationship with Tim Bass. She was way, way, way out of his league, to put it bluntly." So, the prosecutor on this case was a man named Dave, and Dave had been in his 40s at the time that Mandy was murdered. So at this point, he's like in his 70s, right? Because it's been like 30 years. And he had actually retired by this point. But when he found out there was an arrest and there was going to be a trial for Mandy's murder, he was like, "Put me back in, coach. I'm going to be the one who puts this monster away." And not only did he come out of retirement to try this case, right, and to be the prosecutor on this case, he did it pro bono. He didn't want any money for this. He just wanted to put this guy in jail. Tim pleads not guilty, and the trial begins. And every day of the trial, the courtroom was full. They reached capacity every single day. All the people who loved and knew Mandy were there. There was so much media there. The media filled up 2 rows, and they even had to hire extra security just for this trial. The prosecution's case was clear. They said Mandy had been kidnapped, raped, and murdered, and Tim's DNA was inside her body when she was found floating naked in the river. The defense, they had their work cut out for them with this case, but they went in with as much confidence as they could. And his defense attorney said, quote, "Tim Bass is not guilty. He didn't kidnap anyone, he didn't rape anyone, and he certainly didn't kill anyone." Tim's attorney did try to have the DNA evidence suppressed, saying that the DNA evidence violated his client's Fourth Amendment rights to unreasonable search and seizure, saying that Kim was essentially acting as an agent of the state instead of coming to police in good faith herself as like a volunteer. And he said specifically of this quote, "Put simply, law enforcement officers cannot use private citizens to obtain evidence without a search warrant where a search warrant would otherwise be required." Which I think this is a really interesting point, to be honest, because even if you don't agree with it morally and you're like, fuck this guy, because for me, I'm like, fuck this guy, I do believe that Tim Bass did this. At the same time, if the DNA was retrieved in a way where a person is supposed to have a reasonable expectation of privacy, right? And the cops use like a loophole to get the DNA. I think this is a good argument, is basically my point, because like cops shouldn't be able to do things like that, right? We have to police the police, you know what I'm saying? But at the same time, I'm like, damn. But the judge was like, nah, dog, the DNA's staying in, regardless. But I thought it was a good argument. Sometimes the defense attorneys, I'm like, wow, you're really just throwing whatever at the wall to see what sticks. But this one, I was like, you're doing your job. So when this didn't work, his attorney was like, okay, fine. And he told the court that Tim and Mandy had a consensual sexual relationship. He said that Tim, and Mandy had sex the day she was murdered, hours before she was murdered, and said that's why his DNA was in her body, and that DNA in her body can prove that contact happened, but it can't prove that rape happened. It's just wild that they tried to say that he had a consensual sexual relationship with Mandy, especially considering he knew nothing about her, had never made any phone calls with her, never wrote letters to her. No one had ever seen them together. Plus, Tim himself said that he had never had a relationship with her, didn't know her, never knew her, barely even remembered her. His attorney was later asked, like, what could you say to those people who said that there was no proof that this relationship ever happened? No evidence to say this relationship ever happened. And he was like, hey, you know what? I don't have to prove it. The burden of proof is on the state of Washington, not the defense, which is, I mean, technically true, right? The burden of proof is on the prosecution. But I was like, something about the statement just hit my ear wrong, and it made me feel like this guy was a dick, but also like he's not wrong. The defense also had a Dr. Elizabeth Johnson testify at trial, and she was a forensic expert. And she basically testified for the defense, saying that the semen that was found inside Mandy could have been there longer than the prosecution was saying, right? She was saying that the semen could have been in her body for up to 48 hours. But then, for the prosecution, the original medical examiner who examined Mandy back in 1989, which was Dr. Gary Goldfogel, I think his name, Dr. Gary, he was like, Respectfully, I disagree. There was so many things that showed that this was a newer sample, like closer to 12 hours before she was killed. It was like a much more recent sample, and that all of his findings were consistent with her being raped and then murdered. Tim's ex-wife also testified against him, and she was terrified. She did not want to go to that court, and she did not want to see his face. But she did, and she gave police some pretty damning information, or gave the court some damning information. Her testimony was good. It was strong, and it was effective, because she told them how she had lied for Tim, how he had asked her to lie and give him an alibi. And then she told them that he had not only asked her to give him an alibi and to lie for him, but had also asked his own mother. She said she overheard him telling his mother, like, hey, can you do me a favor? Yes, son, what do you need? Can you tell police that Dad, my father, your husband who died 10 years ago now, can you tell police that it was he who killed Mandy? And I guess his mother was shocked and like appalled, and she like brought her hands up to her face like, holy shit, like I can't believe you're asking this. And then she simply told him no. Tim's brother Tom also testified at trial, which was incredibly hard for him because, like, you know, he knew and he loved his brother. He said that the night before the trial, he hardly slept, but as horrible as he felt and as guilty as I'm sure he felt, he knew this was something he had to do. Tom said that after Tim had come under suspicion of murder, Tim had come to him and been like, hey, I slept with Mandy back when she was murdered. I was sleeping with her at that time. And I guess he then asked Tom, like, could you do me a favor? Could you tell police that you were also sleeping with her? I think he was doing this, or at least Tom thinks that he was doing this to make it look like Mandy was like a promiscuous girl, to take suspicion off of him and to like prove like, oh, if she'd sleep with this guy, then she'd sleep with this guy. Obviously, she was just sleeping around. Tom also said that this was the first time his brother had even told him that he had slept with Mandy. And Tom was like, how did this happen? How did you end up having a relationship with Mandy? This is so random. This came out of nowhere. And he said, Tim said of this quote, oh, I just went up to her and said, oh, you're keeping fit. And that was it. And he said that after this, Tim looked at him and was like, you believe me, right? And he says in that moment, he had no idea what to even say. He also said that after he was arrested, after Tim was arrested, Tim was talking to his family. He was talking to his mom and he was talking to Tom. And he was like, listen, I need a strong alibi or I'm going to go to prison. Like, everyone's against me. They're trying to frame me. They're trying to pin this on me. And then he asked his mom, like, hey, mom, I need you to give me an alibi. I need you to tell police that we were out Christmas shopping together so that they can't say that I killed her. And Tom, I need you to back her up. Like, he was asking everyone to lie for him. And his defense was like, I just thought it was ridiculous. Well, not ridiculous. I don't know what I think. It just stuck out to me. His defense didn't try to say that, like, oh, these conversations never happened. They were like, listen, even an innocent person put under extreme stress with fear of going to prison for the rest of their lives for something they didn't do, even an innocent person will start acting in a way that would make them look guilty under this type of stress. And I was like, okay. The defense wrapped up their case by saying that this case was operating under the wrong assumption that there was a sexual assault and there had never been a sexual assault. And the prosecution said this was not a case of consensual sexual contact. She was abducted, she was raped, and she was murdered. So the jury was sent to deliberate, and there was uncertainty in that jury. One juror like stood before the jury table and was like, listen, sometimes teenage girls do sneak out and have relationships that nobody know about. How do we know she wasn't sleeping with this guy? And like a quarter of the jurors were unsure too. Like, there was a lot of doubt there, but they went over each piece of evidence, you know, tacking it up on the board and stringing the red string from piece to piece, trying to like I don't think they literally did that, but figuratively, they were really trying to see what they believed happened here. Outside, everybody was so nervous. They were nervously sitting there waiting, just praying, hoping with all that they had that they would come back with a guilty verdict, because they realized that they all had to agree. Every juror had to agree. If even one juror wasn't sure and didn't agree with the rest, it would be a hung jury and they'd have to go through this all over again. And Mandy's mother was just like praying, like, I cannot do this again. Like, I cannot go through this again, and just hoping that they would come back with a verdict soon. And then, after a day of deliberations, about a day of deliberations, the jury came back with a verdict. They had found Timothy Forrest Bath guilty of all charges, guilty of kidnapping, guilty of rape, and guilty of murder. During the sentencing hearing, Mandy's mother, Mary, and her sister, Molly, were too emotional to speak, so Molly's husband, Mike, actually spoke on behalf of the family. And now that I've said that out loud, I'm realizing how many M's are in this case. Mandy, Mary, Molly, Mike, Merrily, the girl from the water park. It's a lot of M's. Anyways, Mike said to the court on behalf of the family, quote, Timothy Forrest Bass must never be allowed to walk the earth as a free person. Never, ever. Tim's mother did testify. She did come and testify on his behalf. I believe this was at the sentencing phase. I can't be sure now that I'm thinking back. My brain is a scrambled egg. But she said that her son was totally innocent, and any claims from Tim's ex-wife or her own son, Tom, that Tim had asked her to lie for him or to say that her husband was responsible was totally false. And then she said specifically, quote, he was found guilty in people's minds way before the trial even started and is being sent to prison on people's emotions, not any real evidence. The prosecution wants to solve this case even if they convict an innocent person. Tim also addressed the court for the first time ever during his sentencing hearing. During his trial, he never did take the stand, so this was the first time anyone was going to hear him, say something for himself. Speak up, like, what's up, bro? Like, what's going on? And he said at this time, quote, I would first like to say that I am 100% innocent of this crime. Furthermore, I don't believe I received a fair trial. In saying that, though, the better man in me says I should say very little today and give this day to the Stavik family. Ultimately, the judge ended up giving Tim Bass the maximum sentence he could under law, and this was 27 years, and he was sentenced to this in 2019. And it was 2017, what? And it was 27 years, my brain, instead of life, because though he was found guilty of murder, it wasn't premeditated murder. They weren't going after premeditated murder, which honestly, I feel like is the right call in this case. Sometimes I'm like, this is clearly premeditated. Sometimes it's like, that's a really gray area. And I think that if they had tried to go after premeditated murder, they might not have gotten a guilty plea, especially when we look at like how wishy-washy the jury was and how they weren't sure. When you're putting somebody either for life or to death, right? When you're not sure, you're gonna be more likely to, you know what I mean? You know what I'm saying? And we could have had another Casey Anthony situation, because I think their mistake there was going after premeditated murder. Even though emotionally I'm like, fuck Casey Anthony. Logically, I'm like, we can't prove that it was premeditated. So they but anyway. The judge said to Timothy, quote, for 30 years, you have lived free from the responsibility for your acts, but that life has been a lie, and tragically, it had caught your family, your mother, your brother, your ex-wife, and your children in its web. He was then handcuffed and then led out to go and serve his 27 years in jail. And I watched the footage of this, and this is the moment, like this is the first moment during the entire trial that I saw something in his eyes, and it looked like, well, not that I saw anything in his eyes, but it was at this moment that he looked terrified. He was like, oh fuck, like this is real life. I am going to jail. I am guilty. Now, Tim did try to appeal his conviction, of course, you know how they do be doing. He was questioning the search and seizure of his DNA, the sufficiency of the evidence used against him, the ineffective counsel. He also tried to challenge the fact that Mandy's diary was suppressed, saying that it showed evidence that she was suicidal, so maybe she had killed herself and wasn't murdered. Which is like, so fucking stupid. Yeah, I'm sure she freaking hit her own head, got naked, and then drowned herself in the river. Like, that makes a lot of sense. Anyway, the appeal was filed in 2021, but the appeals court was like, fuck you, no, that's stupid. You are in jail. Direct quote. Which is good, right? I think it's good because across the board, it seems like most people believe that he did it. His ex-wife absolutely believes he did it, and even his brother seems to believe that he did it. His brother has said he wonders if Tim planned to kill anybody else, because it's so hard to believe in a case like this that somebody would just do it once, right? That's what blows my mind. Like when I think back to the Sophie Sergey case, if you've seen my video on that, that's what blew my mind, is to do something so violent once. It's so crazy. And his brother has said he wonders if he even planned to kill Heather or Merrily back in the day. And most importantly, like Mandy's family believes that he did it. Mandy's mother has said that she is satisfied with the amount of time he was given, the 27 years, because even if he does get out one day, by the time he gets out, his life will basically be over. But not literally, right? Basically his life would be over, but not literally. Mandy's life is literally over. She is literally dead forever, and her family will never get to see her again, and it just seems incredibly unfair because he got so much free life. You know what I mean? But they remember her, and there are a lot of ways that people remember her. Like, for example, her college at the time that she was killed, like a bunch of the kids at the college went out and bought a tree, and they planted it in her memory, and there were like hundreds of people there to like honor her at that time. And trees live for like ever, right? They're around forever as long as somebody doesn't cut them down. So that's a way that people can remember her for like years to come. In addition to that, a scholarship was set up in Mandy's name at Mount Baker High School, the high school that everyone in this case went to, and it would be awarded to a student who I believe took part in the music program. Yeah, I checked my notes, and basically it's for students that have taken an active part in Mount Baker High School's music program, including participation in their senior year. Like, you can't just do it in your freshman year, you have to be doing it in your senior year. And the scholarship will also be awarded based on the applicant's associated student body activity, school and community activity, high school academic record, work experience, and athletic participation. So they want somebody who's doing it all the way Mandy was to get her scholarship. And speaking of the scholarship, something that's really sweet. You remember Mandy sang the song that was performed at her memorial service? Well, this song was written by two of her friends, Pete and Annie. And they actually went on to record this song, and they like put it on, I believe, cassette tapes, because 80s and 90s. And the tapes were stocked in Fred Meyer stores, like in the surrounding areas. And they were sold for $3. And all the proceeds, or at least part of the proceeds, I think it was all, the proceeds from these sales went into this scholarship fund, which I just thought was very sweet. Now, as far as Mandy's family, her mother did end up selling her home on Strand Road, and she moved an hour away to this place called Oak Harbor. I have to imagine it would be very hard to stay in a place like that, to stay in a home and in a town that's plagued with so many like horrible memories. Even though you have all the good memories, you also have all that bad energy and all those bad memories. So I can imagine it would be hard to stay there. But she also had a good reason to leave. This is gonna, oh my God, it's getting me. She moved so that she could move in with her other daughter, Molly, and meet her new grandbaby, a girl who was named after Mandy. And with that, my friends, is the story of the murder of Mandy Stavik. I hope it was informative and made sense, and that gave you every bit of information you would want when looking into this case. And of course, I just want to thank you for remembering Mandy with me today. And now, considering I gave you all the information, I now want to revisit the question of the day, and that was this. How do you feel about the way that the DNA was collected in this case? I want to know what you think about the method that they went to do it. Do you think he was right when he said they shouldn't have been able to do it? Do you think that they should be able to do things like this because DNA is DNA? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments below, because I feel like this could be a divisive topic. Anyways, guys, before you leave, please don't forget to leave me a comment down below with what case you'd like to see me cover in the future. As you may or may not know, I have a long list of cases, and anytime you leave me a suggestion for a case, I put it on my list. I put your name next to it, so if I cover it, I can give you a shout out. I love looking into the cases that you guys recommend, because they're often cases that I haven't heard of or need more coverage. And I know I'm tired, and I know you're filled with good ideas and good taste, otherwise you would not be here. If you haven't already, please don't forget to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out a new video every single week, and I'd love to hang out with you. Yes, you, specifically you. And if you want to hang out more consistently, all my social media is listed down below, along with a link to my membership where you get early access to non-sponsored videos, priority comment responses, things like that. And now I just want to say one last thank you to Dossier for partnering with me on today's video. It's sponsors like Dossier that make it possible for me to put out videos as consistently as I do. And of course, I want to say a big thank you to you guys for always being so supportive of all my sponsors. You rock, don't ever change. And now with all of that said, I just want to thank you for being here when you could literally be anywhere else in the world. That is tight. You are tight. Please stay safe and be a better person than you were yesterday. And I hope to see you in my next video. Bye.